I did hit the record feature, by the way.
Okay, great. Oh, that's fine. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the BLS R users group. And today, our presenter is going to be talking about web scraping with R and rvest. So just a friendly reminder, this event is being recorded and will be shared later, so please be mindful about asking questions. And also, please hold all questions to the end. Okay. So web scraping is sometimes called web harvesting, is a useful method for gathering data from the internet. The R library, rvest, is intuitive and quick to learn to use this for that. And this talk will provide an introduction to web scraping and how to accomplish this task with R. So our speaker today is Dr. Matthew Hendrickson. Matt is passionate about data analytics and research. He has over a decade of experience constructing research projects, analyzing data, and developing policies and strategies. He has developed and deployed analytic solutions for higher education and private industry to improve operations as well as increase marketing efficiency, recruitment, and retention. He has also developed and taught data mining to master's students. And just a friendly reminder before we get started, if you're needing captioning services, there's the captioning services link that was within the announcement. So if you need that, you click on that. And we also have an interpreter available. If you click on the side-by-side view, you should be able to see her. And I'll say thank you, everyone, for coming, and let's welcome Matt.
Thanks, well, thank you. I know users can't speak, so sometimes that's a challenge, but like I said, they were mentioning you can use the chat if you'd like. I'm pretty informal, so if you have questions that are relevant for at least the current portion of the talk, feel free to put some questions down and see if you can address throughout. But if it's more of a general question, please hold off for the end, and we can address there as well. Like I said, I'm a little more free-form, so I'm happy to make this as useful for you as possible. As Mike said, again, thanks for kick off. So I'm Dr. Matthew Hendrickson. There's my picture. You've probably seen that video. I'll breeze through the about me, but I always like to include something because, why should you be listening? What's going on here? So, Dr. Matthew Hendrickson. I am a cultural scientist by training. So I completed my undergraduate degree in psychology and music. Quite an interesting combination. I continued my studies in cognitive social psychology, so how people think, memory, recall, how attitudes are formed, how people interact in groups. And then I completed my doctorate in law and policy, and I had a focus actually in data privacy law at the federal level. So as a data nerd, I love using data. I wanted to understand how data can be controlled and used in a federal policy way. Studied that as well. As it was mentioned, so I have over a decade, 13 years and more at this point of professional experience. That's predominantly in higher education. I'm an analyst in higher education and study basically every facet of the university and try to help improve how universities function overall. Also do some independent consulting work and have worked with a number of organizations providing assistance with research projects, data analysis, various policy development, strategy, and creating analytics and pipeline solutions for these clients. But enough about me. Let's get to the topic. Let's get to what we're going to talk about today. So today we're going to cover a number of things. And first is a little bit about web scraping. Right? What is it? Give a very high-level intro, give a concept prior to providing an example. We're going to talk some about robots. I'll leave that up for later. We're going to do a very brief introduction to HTML and CSS, which is important to know so you know what parts of the site to scrape and how that works. I'm going to talk about just the setup that you're going to need so you can copy and work along with it if you'd like. I'll mention again at the end, but I do have code, and I believe it's in the content or the discussion right now. There's a link to my GitHub page. All of this is there. You can actually take this. It's licensed for freely licensed. You can use it however you like. I'm going to walk through actually scraping some data using a real example. I'll talk a little more when we get there. Talk about assembling the data you pull out of websites, and then provide a number of references and resources. So various references I'll talk about, the resources. There's some really great walkthroughs that I have linked in here as well, and we'll get to that at the end. So without further ado, do a little bit about web scraping. So our good old friend Wikipedia, what is it? Well, web scraping is the process of automatically binding data or collecting information from the World Wide Web. Pretty generic description, but it really is, it's a flexible methodology, and it allows you to extract either numerical or textual data from the internet. I hear it is difficult to understand me, so apologies. Let me see if I can move my phone closer to myself. Is that better? I'll try to keep an eye on the comment. Awesome. So there are a number of use cases for web scraping, and there's tons of them. I'm going to list a couple here just so we have an understanding of what you can do with web scraping. A very important metric is price monitoring, so you can track pricing over time. That also ties along with just time series tracking in and out, so you can continually scrape web pages to see what changes over time. You can perform various sentiment analysis on textual data. You can do that either on, say, social media. You can also do that on, say, comment sections and various blog posts or pages, or if you're interested in a product, you can also scrape comments on products. You can do brand monitoring to see how the sentiment or understanding or feeling towards your brand changes over time. Various market analysis to see where your organization fits and where that how you're doing compared to your other competitors, as well as even just lead generation. So if you're interested, either through your organization or personally, you can scrape various social sites or web pages in the organization you're interested in and pull data about the people that are associated with that organization. Now we'll talk about some robots. Right? Who doesn't like robots? Well, unfortunately, it's not those kinds of robots. So why am I talking about this? Well, essentially every web page has a robot file. And what it does is controls and tells you if you have right to scrape that site. Some sites explicitly say you cannot scrape. Others say it's fine. Others will also say you can scrape portions of their website, but maybe not all of it. So it's critical that you always ensure that you check this prior to scraping. And why? Well, depending on how much you're scraping and what you're scraping, you can be blocked from that website, either temporarily or permanently. And there's even possibility of facing legal action. Now, let's say it's rare, but it's still possible. So just be cautious and respect the robot.txt file. Well, you might say, okay, how do I utilize this? And how do I know if I can scrape that? Well, R and a lot of other tools have an easy way to do it. There's a robots.txt package, and if you just simply pass a URL, in this case I'm going to try Netflix, you can do this pass aloud command, and you can see here it returns a false. This means that Netflix does not allow you to scrape their site. So I would highly recommend you do not scrape Netflix as a site. I'll show an example here later where you can. So before we get into actually scraping a site, we need to understand HTML and CSS. So the hypertext markup language, or HTML, that's the standard markup language for creating a web page. So that is just the code behind the page. Now, cascading style sheet, or CSS, this describes how the HTML elements are to be displayed, either on screen, paper, media, wherever. And if you think about it, the CSS essentially creates portions of a site. So if you say maybe a grid, there's 4 blocks. The CSS will define those blocks, and the HTML is what you're actually extracting that's going to be inside those blocks. Also talk very quickly about HTML structure. You can see the entire structure of an element. But the first pieces I want to call out are the beginning and end. There's going to be these tags. And it'll start with either, in this example, an A, and then there's going to be a /A. So there's always an opening and a closing for any given tag. And those tags will surround the content. That's what you actually want to pull out, and that's what you want to analyze and look at. But you need to understand, how do I get this content? Well, that's defined by the various attributes. There's a number of different attributes. In this case, it's a reference attribute, and it's called the contact.html. That's the code that provides this, and then the contact us is what you want to extract. An important note about HTML tags. So HTML is structured with these tags, as I said, and they indicate portions of a page. and then they can be called by their structure. It's also important to note that these tags can be nested and often are nested. You'll have tags within tags kind of down the way, and that's important to note when you're trying to extract data from a site. So there are a few important tags of many different types of tags for scraping they'll call out. So some of them are header tags. You'll see an H and a number, usually 1, so there's H1, 2, 3, and so forth. Ps are paragraph elements. That's going to be just your textual data you're trying to pull in many cases. You get unordered lists. Those are UL. There are also ordered lists, or OL. You have LI, so they're individual list items. You also have divs. So those are divisions, and these are very important. You run into these a lot, and that's essentially creating a division within a page, and then you want to extract from that division. And then you also have tables, and tables are nice because it's already a tabular format, and they're usually fairly easy to work with. So you don't have to know HTML and CSS really well to scrape a site. You can get started much more simply than that. There's 2 ways to do this, and I'll show both in an example. You can use what's called the selector gadget, and if you go to the page, there's actually a link here, selectorgadget.com. It's very helpful. It's only for Chrome, and that is a way where you can select the element and just click it, and it'll show you what the element is, and then you can utilize that text string to define what part of a page you want to look at. And there's also an inspect element that essentially every major browser, essentially every browser, has. It's a way to also look at the source code behind a page. There are 2 scraping methods. I'm only going to talk about HTML today. There's also XPath. There's probably a few others before we get too technical, but I want to keep this at a high level. So HTML is just the easiest. It's easier to read, and it aligns very well with these HTML tags. XPaths, on the other hand, they're a little bit hard to work with, but they're useful when, say, an element isn't uniquely defined. So in the example I'll show in a little bit, the element I might be looking for, you're actually selecting a box around multiple elements, where XPath could be useful to help you define that specific location of something on the page. Now, let's get ready for this. Well, let's set up a little more. So to set up, I'm just using 3 libraries here in R. Very simple. So the robots.txt, and that's going to allow me to determine if I can scrape the site. rvest, which is going to be how you scrape the site. And then I'm going to use a tidyverse to clean up and combine the data. And that's all I'm going to use today. So in this case, I'm going to use some Amazon data. Well, I want to determine, I figure it's appropriate, we're talking about R. Let's pull data about R books off of Amazon. So let me just check quickly, I have the Amazon URL, and it shows true, which is great. It means I'm good to scrape this site. So the first step is you want to specify an HTML, and this is from rvest, right? So I'm going to define an object, I'm going to use the read.html command, and then this HTML string is kind of long, but this is going to be, if you copy this string into your browser, it will bring up a page that shows just various R textbooks that you can buy. It's a little bit kind of a weird string, and there's other ways, and I'm not going to get into this because it gets more detailed, but there's ways to essentially create page. You'd see the page number in your URL, and you could probably find a way to write a script so you can do multiple pages at a time. But I want to keep this a little more basic and not go down that road. I'm also going to call out that the data is specific as of 2 days ago. And the reason why is, unfortunately, and I found this out the hard way, Amazon likes rearranging their pages. And they also like to provide ads, and sometimes ads show up, sometimes they don't. And even just kind of creating a script like this, you might run into issues where the page changes on you and your code may or may not still work exactly as you expect. That's the unfortunate art of the art and science of web scraping. And, I can talk a little more about that. There are other pages that are more consistent, that are easier to use. IMDb website is a great one that a lot of people use. It's about movies and TV shows. That tends to be a little more consistent. If you want to start with something, Amazon is a little tough. But there are walkthroughs I linked to that provide good walkthroughs for various sites that might be easier to use. All right, now we're going to actually scrape. You're probably saying we're at 15 minutes. Why are we just sitting here? Well, we need to lay some background. So first step, we're going to look at title. And you'll notice I took a screenshot of the first book, R for Data Science. If you don't know this book, check it out. You can find it online for free. You can purchase it. It's a fantastic textbook. But you'll see on the top here, there's this S-line clamp to, you see clear, toggle position. There's this box up here. This is the selector gadget. And it works, it's nice. It takes a little trial and error at times, but you use the extension and you essentially can click around the page. And what it'll do is it'll highlight. Here you can see it's highlighting the text title, and it tells me the location, which is great. You're going to need that in order to better analyze and pull the data down. So I'll call it out quickly again. Here's the S-line clamp 2. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the object. This is the URL of the page again. I'm going to pass that into the HTML nodes, tell it what am I trying to scrape. I'm going to extract the text from that, and then assign it to an object called type. The first thing you'll notice is there's a lot of junk. You see the /n, you see a bunch of spaces. If you scroll over a little bit, now this is what we want. We want these texts. And then there's a bunch of stuff after. Well, it's actually a very simple command that allows you to do this quickly. The string trim command, so I'm going to write back over my object. So I'm going to just trim it. And that removes the leading and trailing spaces and /n. It's a really easy, clean way. And now you can see, just looking down, we have all of our textbook titles. Nice and clean. So the next step is pull out the book format. You can see in this example, there's paperback books, there's Kindle, sometimes there's e-textbooks, you might see hardcover, whatever the format happens to be. And in this case, I wasn't able to use the selector gadget because this portion of the page isn't distinct to just the text format. So this is where the inspect element comes in, and I'm using Chrome. And you can see on the side now we have a division and then an A class here. And you can see it's A size base, A link, normal, A text bold. And you can see that also matches the element. So now that I know where these text formats are, I'm going to insert that element location, and I'm going to do the same process. Take the URL, I'm going to pass the element, tell it the node that I'm pulling out. You're going to convert that to a text, and then set that to a format object. You can see, once again, we're sort of running into that same problem where we have these slashes and spaces, but you can see the formats are here, and they're looking good. So we'll clean this up again. We'll do the same process we did for the titles, and now we have just a vector of various text formats. Fantastic. Now I want to pull the price, the different prices of the book. So Amazon does this thing where the prices are actually split into two different data elements. I'm using the selector gadget here again as well because it allows me to find this. And you see the price whole and then also a price fraction. So now if I want to pull this out, I need to pull each of these individually. So the first step, again, take the URL, pass the node, and I'm going to print the price, the whole price. Write that to an object, and then let's check it out. Now you can see we have in this case, 40 dots. We have a decimal place already included, so it's just good to mentally note. We're going to follow the exact same process and then get the price fraction. Just changing this node piece, and now we're getting the cents that are associated with any of the book prices. Well, that's not usable individually, so I need to combine these two together. I'm just going to use a simple paste function and put the price whole with the price fraction, and then just no separation. And then it's just going to put those, concatenate them together, and now you can see I have an actual price. But if you're looking at these, you say, okay, it's in the vector, but these are showing as text. They're not actually numeric. So I want to just use an as numeric command, and then set the price there. And now we have a list or a vector of the various prices that are now numeric values. Now, you can set this to be a dollar value. I like leaving numeric, but there's just one more step you can do, and it would easily convert this to some sort of dollar and cent item. So next I want to say, okay, maybe I want to analyze what people think of these books. So I want to pull the ratings. Well, I'm going to use the inspect element again, and now I find this class, it's an I class, and it tells you there's this icon, there's a star small, and then there's this 4 to 5 AOK align box. So when I actually go through here, I clicked on a little bit, I realized that if I included that 4 to 5, and I don't see an example here, but that if a text actually had a rating of under 4, it wasn't being included. So I did a little trial and error, a little manual hacking here, and I just removed that portion. So I'll go back up again. You can see this 4 to 5 portion. I just trimmed that off from this portion here, and then now it's pulling all of the individual rank. So sometimes, again, you'll have to try a few times to see how it all plays out. But now we're not going to be missing these various ratings. Well, you also see now the ratings. I have 4.7 out of 5 stars, out of 5 stars, out of 5 stars. But I don't need that. And if I want to do some sort of analysis on the numeric value, I need to condense this down so it is just providing me that numeric value. So I'm just going to take the substring of the rating value starting at the first character and then take 3 characters. So now I have this format where we can see 4.7, 4.3, and so forth. And the next step is going to just make it numeric if I want to be able to do analysis on a numerical value. The next step is I want to do rating count. Right? We all know if there's only one rating, that rating is a little more volatile than, say, if there's, in this case, 426. So I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm just going to pull out now. There's this section. It's a division, and it's a row, and the size small. But you can see we might run into an issue because it's selecting the entire box. I wasn't able to just select the number, so I had to actually include the rating icon as well. And that's going to result in some extra noise. But that's okay, right? We can still clean this out. You'll see same kind of junk we had before, and then it actually also includes the rating. So we're going to want to clean that up. And then now this is what we actually want. Here's the numerical value that we're looking for. So we'll follow a similar process to before. We're going to trim it so you get the leading and tailing items stripped off. But you still see there's a lot of noise here in the middle. Right? We want to get rid of 4.5, 4.7. We want to get rid of this extra noise. And really all we care about is these last digits here. So we'll follow another step. And I'll just use the substring again. I'm going to take the last 5 digits. You know, this is, I could have picked essentially whatever I would like here that would work. I could have done 3, but I wanted to give it some flexibility in case maybe some of these books get 1,000 ratings in the future, but I don't have to rehash my code. And then now I'll just do the string trim to get rid of those leading spaces. And now we have the textual values for these numbers. And then I'm going to turn to numeric again. So now I have a numerical value for the number of ratings any of these books happen to have. And the last step I want to do, and I'll actually call myself out early here, I didn't actually get the authors of the book. Right? And you might say, why? Well, I was actually having some significant trouble. That text element was difficult to work with, and it was just not able to be pulled together for this particular presentation. Future state, something I'd be interested in fixing. So I'll just say I omitted that for this particular exercise just due to some of the difficulty here. But I do pull now the publication date in case I want to find out how old the book is, quite simply. So we're going to select the item here, which is going to be the secondary text normal block. And we're going to once again follow that very similar process. Or I'm going to take my HTML, I'm going to pass, again, this value, and then I'm going to set it to an item called publication date. And then now you can see we have the date. I want this to actually be a date instead of just a text string. So I'll go ahead and convert that with an asDate command, pick the format I like, and now I have this year, month, day format structured out. And now I can plot and use it as a date. So fantastic. Right, now we have all the different pieces. So let's go ahead and assemble the file. We have the titles, we have the book format, we have the prices, we have the ratings, the number of ratings, and then we also have the publication date. So let's go ahead and now check the scrape. So I want to see how many items are in these various vectors. And you can see we've run into a problem. We have 16 books, and then 16 publication dates. Okay, that's great. We have 14 ratings, so we have to find out what's going on. I check the page, and there's 2 books that don't have a rating. And then, of course, they wouldn't have the corresponding rating number. But we also have 36 formats. So you can see multiple books have multiple. I think every book has at least 2 different formats. There's usually, say, a paperback and then an ebook. We need to control for that because there's something going on. Well, this happens, right? This is that art portion again. Sometimes you get uneven numbers of records that you might want to scrape. So the good news is this is fixable. It's a little manual at this point, and this is where some of the challenge I mentioned earlier comes in, that you're running into a situation where if you run the script and you run it again the next day, the order might change, and then maybe I had anywhere upwards of 40 formats, I think down to even 30 formats. So there's some fluctuation here, and that's just something that unfortunately happens, and there's ways to control for that. If you're really smart and have more time, you can probably figure out an automated way to do this. But for now, I'm going to show you some manual tricks to get you through so you can get a data set to analyze relatively quickly. Let's go ahead and fix the various scrapes. To fix the titles, right? Good news is the title scrapes accurately, but we have multiple formats for every title. So the first pass I want to do is just use a repetition function and then copy it. So essentially, you'd have like R for data science. You'd have, the R cookbook. And what this is going to do is it's going to repeat each title and then place it next to each other. So now, instead of saying 16, there's going to be 32 titles, and it'll be R for data science, and then R for data science, and then R cookbook, and then R cookbook. So I'm creating a copy and placing it next to itself in the vector as we move along. But you'll still note we have 36 entries for some of these other items, not just 32. Well, there's 4 different textbooks that actually have 3 different formats. Like they might have a hardcover, a paperback, and an e-textbook. So I'm doing this manually, and what this is doing, and I'm doing it in descending order so I don't mess the list order. But what's happening is I'm just taking the title item and saying take the element in the 15th position, and then copy itself, and then put it in after 15th position. So what that's going to do is it's going to create that one more record for these 4 books, and then place it after that record that already exists for that textbook. And now we can see that we have 36 titles, which is exactly what we want. Fixing formats, well, great news is we don't need to do this because that's the most detailed grain that we have, and we're all set. If you want to fix the prices, great news again, we don't need to do this because we have 36 already. Fixing the ratings, okay, well now this is a little bit more complicated, but we can still do this. There were 2 books that didn't have a rating. So what I'm just going to do is insert an NA value after where they didn't exist. So for instance, if I'm looking down the page, I go to the Amazon website, there were those 16, I believe, right? 16 textbooks. And then the book 8 and book 12 didn't have a rating. So I'm just going to insert in an NA in the slot where a rating doesn't exist. And now I have 16, which is going to be the same number of titles that I had previously. So we can follow that same process here, go a little quicker this time, but the same process we did for the title. Right? We have multiple formats, so I'm just going to repeat the rating, and then I'm going to add in those 4 books that have the 3 formats, and then add the ratings again for each of those 3. I'm sorry, for those 4. Now, the rating count is going to be the exact same process we had for the ratings, because you won't have a count if you don't have a rating. So we're going to insert in those 2 textbooks that didn't have a rating. We're going to do the same process where we repeat. We duplicate all of the ratings. And then we're going to append these various values along the way. So now we have those 4 textbooks that have 3 ratings. And now we have 36 ratings. So we're in great shape. Last step is publication date. This is going to be the same as the titles, given that we had 16 publication dates. So now we're going to just duplicate each of them. We have 32 now. We're going to fix those 4 that had 3 different formats. And now we have 36 publication dates. So now we've cleaned up all the individual elements. Let's just check our elements again. So we have 36 of everything. Perfect, right? It's exactly what we want. So now we can finally assemble the data. And I'm just going to assign it to a table here. And then I'm going to just take the title, formats, price, all the elements. I'm going to name them, name the individual columns that we have for the table here. And then let's just look at it. Now you can see, let's give an example, R for data science. You can see there's a paperback version and a Kindle version. You have the different price. So the paperback's $40, the Kindle's $25. They have the same rating. They have the same number of ratings. And then they have the same publication date. And that's exactly what we wanted to see here. So now we have a data set that we can analyze as we see fit. So I'm not going to do an analysis on this data just for sake of time, and I'm sure all of you are great at doing this already. But this is how I would go about pulling data from Amazon website about our books for future analysis. I'm going to include here, and again, please go to the GitHub. You can see the different resources there. But there's a number of great resources you can go here. Some are walkthroughs, some are just information about grading. But these are all going to be R specific. Either using rvest, this particular one uses per. In a way, just great data. A couple more references along the way here. Some are just references. A couple are also resources. I actually really, really enjoyed and liked this R-Square Academy entry. So I'd recommend checking that out. That uses IMDb data, and that's going to provide a nice walkthrough in sort of a similar vein of what I've done here in a way to get data about various movies and that example. And with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up. I'll say thank you. Let me just change this real quick. And you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn or even on GitHub. And then once more, so this is a link to the GitHub page. The link is also in the chat. And you can see the repository that I have online. Feel free to copy it. This talk and all of the data in the GitHub repository is freely distributed under the MIT license. So feel free to make a copy and go ahead and explore yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. We do have a question from Nathan Cruz. He mentions here the Selector Gadget gives some great tools for interactive programming on small examples. Any options for learning about the HTML structure absent the gadget? And the other part is, are there any security measures or parts of a functioning HTML file that an external user may not have? So
sure, let me see if I understood. I had a hard time kind of hearing it up front.
I'll post it in the chat.
So yeah, so can you kind of quickly one more time with that, Mike?
Referring to the Selector Gadget, gives some great tools for interactive programming on small examples. Any options for learning about HTML structure absent the gadget?
Got it. Yeah. So there's a couple of sites, and I have a resource here. I linked it just for the intro here, but there's an HTML introduction. So
Your audio cut out, Matt.
Oh, Matt.
No. Hopefully his phone didn't die. So while Matt's getting back on, I have a quick thing that I was going to interject here for everybody. I know there's like 160 people on, which is awesome, by the way. And so a lot of you probably aren't at BLS, but I'll point out for the BLS people that trying to web scrape through our VPN that we're currently using is not, I believe it's not possible. There might be ways around it, but at least I haven't figured out a way to do that. So just so you know, if you're trying to run some of Matt's code and you can't figure out why it's not working for you, it's probably because you're running it over the VPN. So, it looks like Matt's getting back in here. And now he's going to come in as a different user, and I have to unmute him.
Hey, sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right.
Can you hear me?
All right.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Awesome. Sorry, I got disconnected somehow. I apologize.
It's okay.
Awesome. So, yeah, I appreciate someone put that in the comment for me while I was disconnected. But, yeah, so W3 Schools is a great resource just for understanding a lot of just computer science.
All right, we're having some technical difficulties here.
Let me see if it's muted.
Let me see if I can just unmute everybody now. No, I can't. So, yeah, I don't know what's happening there.
Yeah, I think I was muted.
Oh, okay.
I was muted somehow. Someone muted me. If you want me to leave, just tell me. I'm teasing. Awesome. And, yeah, I apologize one more time. And there was a second portion of the question, if we'd like to return to that now. I don't recall what it was because I struggled here for a moment, but I'm happy to return to that. Mike, did you have that in chat somewhere?
What's that, the question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the selector gadget. Are there other options other than the selector gadget? And you were talking about the school, the class.
Gotcha. Yeah. So selector gadget is I think just Chrome only. It's fantastic. But one thing I ended up finding is there was, at least on Amazon, there were some challenges I was running into with it. And both, or I shouldn't say just both, it's more than that. I know Chrome, Firefox, and even Safari, they have what's just some sort of developer tool. It might be called something different for each of them. But the nice thing is that that's something that's going to be in any browser. There's usually some sort of shortcut, or you can right-click. I'm a PC person. I think it's the same for Mac. And then it would then show you the information. And the nice thing is you don't have to necessarily understand all the code in the sidebar. And I'll skip back to a screen where I actually use this so I can showcase that a little more. All right, let's use this one. Okay. So you don't necessarily have to know how to read all of this. These little three dots, and I would presume to be very similar for other tools. I think if you copy that, there might be an icon up top where it's essentially a tool where you can also click, and then you can click on a page somewhere, and then that will bring it to the portion of the code for that section of a page. So, I mean, a selector gadget is nice because it brings to the forefront very quickly the location of what you want, but it isn't too much more difficult to use this developer tool where you're actually looking at the code itself.
So a related question, the selector gadget, is that a default in Chrome, or is it an extension you have to add? How do you get it?
Yes, that is a third-party extension.
Okay. There's a couple questions in the chat about just, do you care to compare R and Python for web scraping?
I haven't really done much in Python, but what I did notice along the way in my research here, as well as just my experience, is that rvest is modeled very closely after Beautiful Soup, which is a very common Python web scraping tool. So I think they were meant to be very similar in function. So I think if you have a preference for either, I'd say go with the tool that's more comfortable than for at least looking at your post-processing. But I'd say the scraping itself, they should be, I would imagine, pretty comparable, but I don't have direct experience in Python doing this. That's on my future list of things to teach myself.
And another question, do you know if rvest can scrape tables that are dynamic? And they say the tables I'm interested in are labeled UI widget upon inspection.
Got it. So that might be a possibility. rvest, I was running into some chats actually even for Amazon. And one thing I was finding out with Amazon is a lot of their information here, and you can see, and I think this if you can still see my screen, there's those stars for ratings. That's a great example. There is a challenge there where that's actually a different element. And one thing I found is there's a programming language called Selenium that a lot of users believe that Amazon's using at this point. And essentially what that is a database underneath the web page, and it's basically porting information from the database into the page instead of using sort of your traditional HTML or CSS structure. And that was causing some problems. So I think there is certainly a way to do that, but that becomes, I think, much more challenging. There is another tool I've used, and it's a Chrome extension, so I know there might be sort of security questions. It's called Table Capture, if I remember correctly. And I've used that it's a little more manual, but you can essentially use that item to, I think it copies your clipboard. And what you can do is just create and take the information off the table with that item, and then you presumably could create some sort of a data frame within your tool and then analyze as needed.
And do you have any advice for people? Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so do you have any advice for people who are scraping over the virtual network? Or have you used another question is Arcelium? Have you ever used that?
Arcelium, yeah. So I'll go through each of those. The VPN, so I haven't tried that. I'm not sure. Presumably that could be some sort of like authentication issue, right? Because I'm trying to think of the driver behind it. I haven't tried scraping over VPN, so I'm not sure if that will run into an issue. If it does, there might be some sort of authentication to need to address, but I'm trying to think, would that still be an issue? I think the only issue might be is if I feel like the VPN doesn't allow, if you have some sort of gateway where you can't access pages, maybe a challenge. But I'm trying to think, offhand, I can't think of any kind of struggle there. And maybe there is one, and please feel free to tell me if there is, but I'm not really sure if that would be a challenge. One thing I do see, though, is another question was about Selenium. So that was one thing I was debating on trying out, but I think for this particular example, and I definitely want to dig in more, but I don't have experience currently. I think that might help with some of the challenges I was running into, at least with this particular presentation, and would probably create some sort of automation, make it a little more clean. But there were certainly recommendations on some of the chats that I was exploring that pointed me in that direction.
Okay, great. We got two more questions from Marceria. She's asking if about the extension that you use, Matt. Is it available in Chrome? And how do you go about adding those to a browser?
Yep, it is. Let me see. So I'll go ahead and try to go here. So it's selector gadgets, this item right here. But if you go, right, just kind of I'm trying to think of the fact. I don't know if you can see my screen. I hope you can. Please tell me if you cannot. Okay. So there's a web page for it, all right, but I'm trying to think where is the actual, so here's the Chrome extension. So if you go into Chrome, all right, if you go to the More Tools, there's an extensions item, and you could search directly for it. There's actually also on my GitHub page, there's a shortcut to, I think, this as well. And you would go here, and you would click the Add to Chrome button here, and it'll add a button, basically, it'll probably pop up here, right, where now, if I want, I can click it. It's not going to let me do it here because I'm not on a legitimate site, but it'll just have an icon. And then once you go to a random page, you actually maybe try to go to Amazon quickly. Right, you would now just kind of click the item, and then it would allow you to All right, so now we have an item, and it'll start highlighting items, right? So it'll take some trial and error, but then essentially what you'll do is you'll click, say, a path here, and now it'll pick any item and highlight them for you and then give you the actual item. Now you can copy and paste this into the code that is available through rvest, and we'll pull out the elements that are associated with that location.
Okay, great. Another question is, Marceria is asking, she's trying to scrape data from PDF on a website, could you point me towards how to learn to do that? That was the question. Hold on.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So there's, I haven't tried directly scraping PDFs with rvest. Presumably that would be possible, but I don't know how that would work. So you basically have to try to find, and I don't know your full use case, right? So there's probably a way to automatically fetch if you can create a function or a call that would allow you to basically download the PDF. And then there are really great tools for PDF data extraction in R as well. Drawing a blank on the package name right now, but I know there's some great stuff out there that allows you to work with PDF locally. So that could be an option, because I'm trying to think. The issue with like a PDF on a website, sometimes it's just a link where you have to go to it. Other times, browsers will tend to display the PDF, but it's not, the PDF itself isn't a web page, right? Because it's a static document. So that might need to be utilized through a different PDF package that R would have available.
For the people that are sort of new to this, can you give them a quick rundown of like the difference between this web scraping approach versus people that are businesses that have APIs available?
Yeah, so if a business has an API available, there's a different way you would essentially interact with the API. So one I'm a little more familiar with, I'll say, is RTweet. So that's another package in R. We'll talk a little about that, but that utilizes the Twitter API. So there's either going to be a package potentially already created, or you're going to interact with the API itself, and there's going to be a different way to do that, right? Because you're not necessarily scraping the page anymore. You're interacting with the tools that those developers have created to provide data that they would be using to populate their page. So it's a kind of a different avenue and a different way of accessing data, and that's a little more akin to just pulling data from like a data warehouse. Excuse the sort of the overgeneral comparison, but you're now interacting with a data tool as opposed to, say, web scraping, which you're trying to get data from an unstructured source that's not being packaged for you. And then you're going to use a tool like rvest and more web scraping as a way to access data that's not necessarily provided, whereas, say, an API is a tool to provide you data quite easily.
Cool. And one question that I had is, you mentioned at the beginning about the robots.txt file. Do you find that always, or at least mostly, syncs up with if a website has terms and conditions that they find legally binding? So like do they have to, because sometimes I find it difficult to find terms and conditions for the website. So if I can't find it, does that mean all is legal, or or will all of that be reflected in the robots.txt file?
Well, that's a great question, and I would presume they should be correlated, but it's not something I've actually checked. But the data privacy nerd in me is really excited by that question. But generally speaking, I mean, to give a little too much history probably for your question, so the robots.txt files were predominantly created for search engines, right? So Google and a number of others previously, but I think Google pushed heavily for it. And essentially those tools, right, so Google itself will crawl websites to essentially try to index them, to try to get data, so forth. So that robots.txt were basically created for a function like that to say, can this be crawled in the same way? Well, web scraping is sort of a similar process to crawling, right? Where now you're going to try to go in and say, okay, does this site explicitly tell me through a file they provided when the page is created if I can or cannot scrape data? So generally speaking, right, the robots.txt is going to be the way to go, because that is a public-facing file that you can access that tells you if you can or cannot scrape. Now, those files can get complex and kind of weird to read. So Amazon's is very complex. I think I have a copy of it in my GitHub repository. But I would say, I would try to check both, but generally speaking, robot.txt should take care of you. But if you are concerned about some sort of legal implications, doing a large amount of scraping, right? Because I think that's when legal issues arise. If you're doing a heavy amount of scraping, you'd want to check to see if there is some sort of, terms and conditions. And generally, if it's a page that's going to have a bunch of data and that they're worried about a lot of scraping, that's the type of place that might have an API available as well, which you might be able to access and provide and get data from too.
Great, thank you.
Great. Brandon, did you get that question from Gordon?
Oh, yeah. So are there any tips for scraping HTML tables that have multiple entries in a single cell so that each entry has its own row in a tibble or data frame? I think like if there's hard line breaks or something like that within a cell in a table, does that sort of throw everything off for you?
It could. And there's a link to a page. Let me see if I can try to go to that page and check to see if I have better sense. But yeah, I mean, one of the okay, I think I see what's going on. So here's the page it was linked, right? So I'm assuming it's something like this, right, where you have multiple elements. So that's actually interesting to see. One of the things we can check quickly is there. So it's actually this might actually be okay through this. So if I clear this out again one more time, you can see it's actually highlighting the individual data elements separately. So that's actually a good sign because it probably will pull this out. What you're going to run into here, though, is you'll have to do like a repeater for the Solomon Islands in this example, much like I did for mine with the book titles, because there's only one entry where there's multiple entries here. But I think that's going to be a similar thing where you'll actually get these should be separate values on their own. But let's say there's a challenge where it's not, right? You're going to run into probably something similar to, a moment here, the book rating count, right? Where I was pulling and there was something like this where you have the actual rating, but then you're also going to have the rating count. And that's just going to have to, there will be some sort of commonality, right? So you could probably write some sort of regular expression or some other way, because you can see like it's the same number of spaces, it's the same number of ends, so it's the same amount of stuff, a technical term, but that exists between each of the different elements here, where you would probably just try to write a way to extract out and delete the middle, and then you could use some of the functions in R, either tidyverse or base, depending on your preference, to create two different data elements. So you might need to split those out manually, but it might also be, as in the example link that's provided, you might be able to, that might not be an issue up front.
I don't know if you saw any other questions, Mike.
No, I didn't see any other questions, no.
All right.
Okay, so if anyone has any questions, just let us know. Going once, twice. Okay, everyone, let's give a big round of applause or sound